Welcome to Las Doctoras podcast, featuring your favorite profas bringing women and gender studies topics out of the university and onto the kitchen table.
I'm Cristina, Chicana, Pinay, queer, Sha, ella, traveler, Earth, Mama Bruja.
I'm Renee, Mexicana, Tejana, Chicana, she, her, ella, Mama Bruja, scholar and scribe.
Together, we are the academic and word brujas creating revolutionary spaces outside the walls of the ivory tower to cast spells, read the ancient texts, and tell our sacred stories. We make this magic as an offering to our ancestors, to those who will come after us, and for the change we wish to see in the world. Salud!
All right.
Hello. Welcome to Las Doctoras podcast, episode Who
We're
Knows?
so-
Who knows
It's
what?
kind of the thing. I love it.
Um,
I love it that we want to be the people that know, but we're
yeah.
happy to not.
We never know what order we're gonna
Excited.
release these in. But we're excited to be here with an amazing guest. I have to say that this season,
Mhm.
we've had the opportunity to just interview all these really cool people, and
Mhm.
yeah, it's just been exciting to see the interest from our community and wanting to have these important conversations. So
Particularly with this guest too, we've been on your podcast, and it's so nice to be able to, switch roles here. And yeah, Yvette, it is so wonderful to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on today.
yeah, so tell us who you are, your name, pronouns, ancestors, astrology, and then what do you do? What's your magic?
Yeah, so my name is, I go by Dra Yvette Martinez-Vu, and I'm a first-gen neurodivergent, chronically ill mama and Chicana academic coach to first-gen BIPOCs. My pronouns are she, her, and I am of Mexican heritage. And on my father's side, I actually have Yaqui ancestry, and on both my father and mother's side, we've got Spanish ancestry. So the what do you call it? The mestizaje that comes with a lot of us who are
Yes.
Chicanas,
Mestizaje.
Chicanx, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but that's me. And in terms of what I do, I support first-gen BIPOCs in reaching their personal and their academic goals, and I do that through one-on-one and group coaching, through workshops, and through my podcast, the Grad School Femtoring podcast, social media, and newsletter, you name it. I try to be in different places and spaces and offer free and paid services for different individuals.
I saw the
love
posting
it.
about your newest offering, right? Is that different from what
Yes.
you've offered in the past?
It is. So, I mean, I've been doing this as like my main gig since the end of 2021. That was when I left my job in higher ed. So I left higher ed completely. And all of 2022, I was focused on one-on-one coaching. So I accepted clients to try to support them in whatever way I could. I knew I was like, I'm really good with organization, with setting up systems, with productivity, with helping people get into grad school, with personal development, because I had been going through that process myself. And that's what landed me to leaving my job and moving abroad. And it was through those one-on-one sessions that I realized, I guess, what my niche is and also who I tend to attract. And I think that the more we are ourselves, we tend to attract and repel certain people.
Love. Yes.
Yeah.
Show, yes.
And so now I'm very loud and proud. I'm like, yes, I am first gen. Yes, I am Chicana. Yes, I'm disabled. And what, you know? And so, yeah, the group coaching came about this year very recently because I was reached out to by a McNair program, which is really funny because that's the program that I happen to work for. There are over 180 programs nationwide. So that was the type of program I worked for when I left higher ed. I always loved my students, and I missed and craved that. And they reached out to me. They wanted me to customize my program and tailor it to their students. And I thought, well, this is the time. I've been doing this for over a year. I've been doing one-off workshops also for over a year. I think it's a time for me to put it all together into one course and to offer it to the public. And so that's what you all recently saw, that I am launching my first group coaching program to the public, and it will be happening pretty soon. And I'm excited because once that's done, I hope that I can offer it continuously, different cycles throughout the year.
That's amazing.
This is so beautiful too, because we have been offering our services to the public, and now we're offering it to the university. So this is
interesting.
We were similarly contacted by University of Minnesota, and so we just finished up a workshop series with them.
How funny, the Midwest, because this McNair program I'm working with is also there.
I mean, I think that there's a lot of there's a lot of us out there. Money, all kinds of stuff, but I love it. So, okay, before we get into the meat of our conversation, we have to know your astrology. What do you know?
Right.
Can I guess?
Christina wants to guess.
You already know, Christina.
I know. We talked about it, but there was Capricorn, right? There's Capricorn somewhere.
No.
Just all the discipline, the rhythm, I was just thinking, it's got to, anyways, tell us again.
Have in some other part of my chart, because I only know, like, off the top of my head, my sun sign, my rising, and my moon. So there probably is some Capricorn somewhere. So I'm not going to say no. Never mind. I take that back. But my
full read
my
next
sun,
time.
I should have pulled it up before I got here. My bad. But my sun sign is Virgo. My rising is Cancer, and my moon is Leo. So I really feel it in in intimate spaces.
I love it. Right. We've got Virgo, Cancer, but that Leo, I think that's
we love it.
You said Leo moon.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like
that's good stuff.
I mean, like, I'm not the best astrology reader, but I will say I feel like that's what we see on your social media, and that's what we see.
I want to hear more about that.
Well, I think that's a positive thing.
That fuerte, like the fire that you
even just you saying, like, I'm gonna show up as who I am. I'm not gonna, and that's when you've seen things happen, and that's what we're seeing. That's what I think we're seeing now, like with this. This group coaching is like it's you just not being afraid to be who you are, and I think the Leo gives you the confidence to do that.
The confidence,
I appreciate that insight. It's going to reframe a few things for me from here on out, but yes.
Okay, so let's get into it, because this is a
great conversation.
I think it's a great conversation, and I do want to set the stage for all the things that are happening in our lives that really kind of make it very timely. So, like you said, you're neurodivergent, and even on your social media, you talk a lot about ability and disability and neurodivergence, and then obviously, because we're talking particularly in higher ed, so we wanted to talk about that. Like, what does that mean? And it's very timely given what Christina's just experienced, right? Still recovering from a broken
tibia, tibia, fib, and my disability.
And now, I mean, even I remember the first, when you were like, what do I do with work? And I was like, oh no, you should get ADA. Like, like, you're covered. Like, you just tell them, and, you need to demand the things that you should get,
exactly.
And then myself going through an application process, and hopefully by the time this airs, things have settled. But as at the time of this recording, I interviewed last week at a school that I guess I won't name yet, but I did get rejected. I got my rejection letter on Friday, and I think that what was interesting for me I've had a journey with like learning disabilities, both my children, right, have been kind of I've been navigating that with my children. So it has really had me thinking, as a professor, like, how do I make sure that I'm really making my classes accessible, right? So it's been a lot. It's been a journey for me to kind of look at my classes and look at that, and coming from a social justice lens and just really trying to integrate disability justice and all of those things. And then going through this interview process where it just feels very like, so for example, I went through the interview process 2 years ago, and the toll that it took on my mental health was really, really rough, to the point where I said I didn't want to do it again. So when the job came up again last year, I was like, I'm just not going to do it, because I can't put myself through that. And I kept naming that I think the interview process is toxic. I don't understand why it is the way that it is. And so then when the job came up again this year, I was like, well, let me, I was in a little bit of a better headspace. And then it's just like, no, wait, like now I'm really seeing clearly it is absolutely toxic. And I have a friend of mine, a parent at our children's school. She works in like DEI, and we were kind of going through some of the school's like procedures around like hiring. And she was like, they have to make sure that they get the interview questions like 3 days, if not at least 24 hours ahead of time. And I was like, wait, what? I'm getting questions 15 minutes before my interview. Like, how is that? Like, and I think part of me wants to like rationalize, and part of me wants to be like, what the fuck? And then in the interview, they're asking me how I'm integrating, like, pedagogy and, assignments that are, meeting students' needs. And I'm like, but you're not even doing that in this interview process.
You're not modeling that.
And so I'm very, explicit that I'm coming from a disability justice perspective, and these are the tangible things that I've done. And then I'm not really sure how it's being heard, or how it's being received, or how it's being whatever. So it's just been like, we've just kind of been experiencing all these things, and we're like, what does Yvette have to say about all of this? Like, tell us, I mean, maybe just in general, like, what's your experience with all of these things in the space of academia?
Yeah, so I want to start by offering some context, so some background and backstory on how I came to arriving at this point where I'm very clear about saying and naming the ableist practices in academia and the ways that it doesn't always accommodate for someone like me who's neurodivergent and disabled. And so it ties back to my time in grad school. I have shared on different occasions about kind of my origin story, and a lot of formative things happened for me in grad school. One of them was realizing I really loved working with students, especially first-gen students of color. And another one was becoming a mom. That was huge for me. But another really, really big thing that happened for me in grad school was that I burnt out to the point of developing chronic illnesses. And at that time, I didn't have the language or the means to articulate what I was going through. And so I experienced a lot of shame. I experienced a lot of internalized ableism. I did not share about my chronic illnesses publicly. I tried to suck it up and just push through, and I only made myself sicker. And this was also while experiencing, birthing complications afterward, while dealing with severe postpartum depression, and ending graduate school realizing like, this is not for me. This is not it. And that was my arrival at like developing a chronic illnesses. I didn't start to have the language to articulate it until my son at age 3, he got diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And we had him assessed, when he was 1.5 years, he started getting speech therapy. And by age 3, we got that diagnosis. And at that point, we were transitioning from moving to LA to Santa Barbara for a new job. That was when I started working for the McNair program. And around that time, so I started learning, okay, there's, what is autism? we weren't having these open conversations on social media even about that. So I thought, like, is my son going to be okay? Like, how do I support him? How do I advocate for him? But then at the same time, I was transitioning to a new job, and I started to notice myself getting really sick again. And I was dealing with a toxic supervisor who micromanaged, who expected me to be there 8 to 5, who really pushed back against my boundaries and my advocacy work. So that at that point, out of desperation, I reached out to HR and I asked for formal accommodations. I went to see multiple specialists and got medical doctor notes. And I got my accommodations for 2 hours of remote work in the mornings because so my chronic illnesses, I have a series of them, but a lot of my symptoms are the worst in the mornings. And I have tummy issues. So I've got colitis, I've got migraines, I've got stuff going on with my bladder, interstitial cystitis. I have stuff going on with my uterus and pelvic pain. I don't have an official diagnosis of endometriosis, but I have very similar symptoms. And last year, after I got COVID, I developed long COVID symptoms and got diagnosed with dysautonomia, which is a dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system, which means that when I get up, my heart rate starts to spike, and it spikes because my blood pressure goes down. And so I start to go into this pre-syncope situation where I start to get really foggy, really dizzy. My vision starts to blur. The hearing starts to feel like I'm submerged underwater, and I start to feel like I'm gonna pass out. And this is regularly. So this was. I believe that I've probably had dysautonomia for many years because all of the symptoms that I've had before fall under it. But I was getting treated for individual things before. So it was all like just see separate specialists, and I got separate diagnoses. So finally here in Portugal, I got one diagnosis that fits all of the things. And I think the reason that I figured that out was because my symptoms just worsened with COVID, which is the case for a lot of people who get COVID, which is why disability justice has become even more of a thing for me, because there are so many people. 1 in 4 people in the US have a disability. You know someone who has a disability, whether you realize it or not. And yet we're going out and acting like COVID doesn't exist anymore. And you go out and go into classrooms, again, COVID doesn't exist anymore. Accommodations, some professors might make you feel like you're taking advantage or gaming the system, or you don't look sick. Why? Because a lot of people who are chronically ill have invisible disabilities, and they only show their face when they have enough spoons, that is enough energy to show their face. And the same goes for like neurodivergence. A lot of folks who are neurodivergent maybe don't know that they are. And if they do know they are, they've learned to mask it to survive. And so then when you all of a sudden start to disclose it, people don't believe you. So that's kind of in a nutshell, like a little bit of background info on how I arrived to it. It's only been, my son is 9 now. So it's only been in the last couple of years that I've started to learn more about the world of disability advocacy and neurodivergence and embracing it, because my husband is autistic, my son is autistic and ADHD, and I am highly sensitive. I don't have any official diagnosis. High sensitivity is a trait, not a formal diagnosis. I have been diagnosed with depression and anxiety for a very long time. But my high sensitivity combined with the executive dysfunction that I deal with because of my chronic illnesses renders me disabled and allows me to feel comfortable self-identifying as neurodivergent, because neurodivergence is a self-identifying term. If you find that your mind functions differently than everybody else around me, even if you don't have access or the privilege to be able to get a diagnosis, you do have the power to self-identify as neurodivergent.
Oh my gosh. I'm like, there is so much to unpack here.
Yeah.
I think I want to just start by like thanking our children, you know, or thanking like parenting, you know, and just witnessing how when we advocate for someone else that we love, we learn a lot about ourselves, you know, and that how that's a great, what a beautiful opportunity to take that and to really dive into. And this is, I'm thinking like, what's the language around this? Trauma informed, neurodivergent informed, like what is it we're asking for people to consider in every aspect? It's like relationships basically, right? But
I want to, first of all, thank you, Yvette, for sharing that story. And it is very vulnerable, you know, to kind of say these things. And you know, talked about internalized ableism and, you know, the invisible disabilities. And I think that COVID, and then COVID, of course, right? I think COVID did so much damage, and it highlighted, it kind of brought to the surface what was already there, right? In so many ways, at least in my experience, like when I was teaching primarily online, how I thrived. I thrived so well because it made it was a modality that was easier for me to adapt to, realizing that sitting in 2 hours of traffic a day was, I mean, it's impossible, you know, and I think for a long time I felt like, oh, I just have to suck it up, like everybody commutes and it's not a big deal. But I've suffered with even kind of saying certain things like, you know, I have PCOS, and then I Hashimoto's, right, which is a thyroid issue. And chronic fatigue is something that I deal with a lot. So I reach a threshold, right? There's a time in the day, that's it. Ain't nothing gonna happen. And I mean, like, really, it's not just like I'm tired. It's like
no. It's fatigue is a whole other thing that most people don't even
my whole
realize.
body.
I'm like, you think you're fatigued? For me, but the fatigue is worse than my postpartum fatigue. You know, those sleepless nights from my baby, those are rough. But the fatigue that's chronic illness, autoimmune fatigue, CFS fatigue is a whole other kind of fatigue. Sorry, I just want to validate what you just said.
No, and because it's like everything.
Yes.
So I've had to say to my husband, like maybe a few years ago when my kids were younger, and you know, it's like I get home from work and then I have to still go into parenting mode, and I would call him, be like, when the fuck are you getting home? And I finally had to like name for him, my threshold for energy is much lower than yours. I'm not calling you just to complain. I'm calling you to tell you I cannot, you know, I cannot, I can't, like, my body's gonna, you know, stop functioning. And so it's been a journey in that way. But, and then again, you know, Christine, like you said, like our children are that highlight for us. So my oldest was diagnosed with dyslexia, which I just had a feeling, you know, because he was struggling reading, and we were ruling everything else out, right? Is it hearing? Is it vision? Is it this? Is it that? And then I was like, oh, I just have this feeling, you know, and sure enough, and I felt very empowered by it. You know, when we did an assessment and they told me, they were kind of like, are you okay? And I was like, oh no, this feels great, because at least I know what it is. I know that it's, you know, because I think you do, the internalized ableism is, I have to suck it up. It's just me, right? There's something wrong with me. Like, and not there's something wrong with me and I deserve accommodations. It's like there's something wrong with
dismissiveness,
and I need to like get over it, right? And so I was like, oh no, this actually feels really good, because now I know what, you know, what we can do for him, or I have a path, right?
The power of naming is
the
so
power of naming it. And it's so interesting, even that, you know, our kids go to a school where, you know, it lends itself to being more accessible, and there's still a you know, Eurocentric white supremacist model, in that there's still this standard, you know, and the idea is that even when there's kids who, or, you know, children who vary from that standard, it's not like, then let's change up the standard. It's like, well, what can we do to make sure that they'll eventually meet the standard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And which is a little different, I think, than traditional, where it says, well, if you don't meet the standard, you're fucked, right? Like, and you like, and we're not, you know, we're not even going to do anything. But it's still, so there's still, you know, blind spots in that, which I've been navigating. Anyway, I think all of this comes back to us. And I know Cristina has been experiencing some of this lately, but how do we, like you said, we knowing what we know, and even us, like, struggling to find the language to name all those things. And then we're working in these spaces in academia, particularly in higher education, particularly, that wants us to just suck it up and, you know, and produce at a particular level. And that when we don't, we feel guilty about it. Right.
I find this conversation, it's like so subtle, because I mean, we have named a lot how the standard, the academic standard, is white supremacist, you know, toxic masculinity, like capitalistic, you know, commodifying. Like we name this a lot, you know. This is just like another level that I find to be so intimate, right, and vulnerable. And this is so powerful to do this, but it does feel like something that's like always there, but somehow never seen, you know, at the same time.
Yeah, I want you to share, Cristina, what your
I was waiting to hear a little bit more about your experience
of, you know, navigating.
Yeah.
Navigating.
Well, Renee was saying earlier, and I probably, that I'm like, if I had a real disability, you know, then this would suck.
She dismisses herself a lot. She'll say, like, oh, if it was
a temporary
disability, then, you know, then I deserve A, B, and C. Yeah.
And you've also had to remind me, like, well, yeah, you just don't, you don't have to teach that class. You don't need to, you know, like you should. I think as a Virgo, so, or something, or oldest child, or, you know, first generation college student or whatnot, or people pleaser. There's all these different things that would, you know, make me, or like encourage me to push through. Right. Actually, even as you're naming the fatigue in the afternoon, or I just think, oh, I can hear my grandma saying, my abuela saying something like this in a different way. You know, I can hear me say this. It's hard for me to recognize. Yeah, I went to actually even a gathering yesterday with my other colleagues, and I had to just again name. Oh, I'm going to need to find, you know, parking for disabled parking. I don't know where that's at. You know, I had to like call or email, and no one really responded, even when I got a hold of someone where that was, you know. And I kind of feel like I'm qualifying as I talk to them, or I am qualifying. I'm like, I know I have a temporary disability, so but I do need this, you know, instead of just being like, where is it? You know? Yeah. Right. So I broke my fib in January. I continue to need not be able to walk as far as I used to be able to walk, you know. I am in different recovery and healing spaces, but I think that advocating like to the university or in different spaces brings up just the fact that this internalized ableism, I love that you named that, is real for me. It's like within, and that's the place that I struggle in the morning and other places like that. I like wishing I didn't have, you know, to address it at all, you know. That's where I come from this into the conversation.
I say, as somebody who was, you know, witnessing her kind of navigate this, and like, again, that first week of like, what do I do with my classes? Like, oh no, they need to go all online. Like, and then I think you even said that they gave you so many weeks. I was like, no, like that needs to be the whole semester. Like, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to give you a few weeks. Like, F that. Like, and then I even said, I was like, and if they don't give you that, you need to call the union and you need to like figure that shit out, because that's just like, And it's easier for me, I think, as the outsider to tell her that. But I'm sure if it were the other way around, I would also have internalized ableism and having to kind of work through those things. And, you know, the idea of like,
well, yeah, the system was set up so that I had to like prove it every 6 weeks. I had to go to the doctor, right? Yeah. That, yeah, it's not, it is something there's constantly seeking proof and like, tell me you need this, show me you need this, you know?
yeah. Like when we went to Universal Studios last week, and we were like,
are we gonna?
Christina's like, you know, I didn't even think about it. I was like, oh, we're going to Universal Studios, like, and then she's like, I can't really walk. I'm like, oh fuck. So my grandmother has a wheelchair, so I was able to borrow the wheelchair from my mom. And then we went and we got the ADA accommodations, but it was, yeah, there's still this fear of like, are they going to ask for like proof, or are we somehow gaming the system because, you know, it's not like she's, and you kept saying like, what if I had a, you know, a permanent disability? I'm like,
well, I felt like I was,
friend, I'll push you. Like, let's just,
you know what I mean? Like, to me, like, yeah, some of the accommodations, I think, oh, this is helping me in this moment. But if I had like this disability for the rest of my life, this is terrible accommodations, you know, this is not,
it's not enough. The accommodation,
and that's how it is for most disabled people, unfortunately. I mean,
it's insight into that. And I think the other thing that I really wanted to point out was, so in across the board in all our different experiences, the common denominator has always been that we have to seek out the diagnosis. We have to seek out the proof. We have to seek out the accommodations, right? You said that you finally had to go to HR and they had to, you know, so the amount of work that it requires, like, again, that just feels like it doesn't make sense, right? So now not only do you have a disability, but then you have to do extra work to get the accommodations that you require. And so again, I'm trying not to make it all about me. I'm just still processing this rejection.
Well, can I say too, I have actually now created in my mind like a disability fund, or I gather my receipts to just show like this is all the money I've had to pay in order to accommodate my disability. And I probably wouldn't even
you've had to do for yourself, right? Not like somebody's giving it to you. And so I think about like, all this work that it requires students to do. And, you know, from the beginning of my teaching experience where I've had students come with the paperwork and, you know, that I would have to sign off on whatever accommodations that they needed. And if they had to take a test and they needed extra time, you know, there was all this like running around that had to be done, right? All this paperwork that had to be filled out. And so I think over the years, I was like, oh, this is a lot. Like, it was a lot for me as the professor to like having to be doing things. And I was like, why don't I just make this the standard, right? Like if people need 3 hours to take a test, everybody fucking gets 3 hours. Like why make more work for anybody, right? To have to do all of this. And then I think little by little, I've continuously tried to look at those things. Like when students are coming to me, I've had students say, their accommodation is extended due dates, right? Where they have, you know, they get 2 extra weeks or whatever. And I was like, why don't I just do that? Give that to everybody. Like, and especially during COVID, especially, you know, and I still, you know, even now, like there's still all kinds of things going on and mental health things. And I'm like, so I've kind of integrated into my classes flexible due dates so that, you know, it kind of encourages, you know, folks to stay on track, but also doesn't punish them if they fall behind, you know. And again, those are like small efforts in that. And I think that, again, it just has me thinking about the extra work that people have to do to gain those accommodations.
I mean, it is a lot of work. It is a part-time or full-time job for most folks navigating disabilities with the number of medical appointments, with documentation, and just how expensive it is to be disabled, to be chronically ill. It is completely unjust, and it's something that is completely invisible to folks who are non-disabled.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that you are becoming more aware of it, because there are so many hurdles, so many barriers, and there are things that you can do as an instructor to ease in those barriers for students. And going back to Cristina, what you were saying earlier, what I heard from you was not only that internalized disableism that manifests itself as my disability is not enough. And there's a lot of comparison that goes on in the disability community of like, well, my disability is not that bad, or my disability is not visible, or like my disability is dynamic and like today it's fine, but I don't know about tomorrow. And so thinking that it's not up to par with some sort of definition of whatever idea you have in your head of what a disabled person looks like and does and can or cannot do, that is what's detrimental to us. So there's, on the one hand, I heard like the internalized ableism of like, oh, well, my disability is temporary, but it's still a disability. And two, the grief process, whether it's temporary or not, there is still grieving. And I want to honor that grieving and like allow you to give yourself time and space to process that grief, because it doesn't matter how long, especially for those of us that develop disabilities later on, because if you're born with a disability, I imagine, I don't know, it's not my experience, but I imagine that you don't know any other way. You've been born that way. Whereas if you develop a disability later on as an adult, there's a huge grieving process and transformation of who you were before versus who you are now. And I still grieve who I was before. I got a chronic illness. This was in 2011. It's been over 10 years and I still grieve it. Why? Because yes, it's been a completely different life than what I imagined. And now I grieve it, but I also fully accept and embrace it. And so those two things can coexist. Yeah, that's right. And so, whether it's temporary or not, I just want you to know that there is a grieving process and that it's okay to like miss your former self.
I really needed to hear that. I think, Renee, you've bring that up a lot. And actually, as you know, we were talking about, it's hard for me. And I realize I am in the middle of grieving, you know, for my leg and trauma, and then also this the internalized voices and the voices that kind of come around. I think just they cycle around, and I'm
grieving. I feel like that's a huge piece, right? To think about it in that way. I'm like, I think it's interesting because when I talk about like chronic fatigue and people will say, oh, as you get older, you know, you just get more tired. And I'm like, you know, like, I love that you validated chronic like fatigue, you know, from autoimmune is so different. Because I still, just this weekend, Saturday, I think I slept like all day. And the whole time I was like, oh, I should be doing stuff. I should, you know, like, why am I so tired? Like, I still guilt myself into not allowing myself to truly rest, even though my body is like, nope, not gonna happen, right? Like,
I wish that I could have like sent Trisha Hersey's voice into your mind to be like, rest is resistance.
I know, and I know, it's like, you know all that, and still, right? Like, that's how internalized it is, that you know logically all of those things, and you still are like, And so I do like look back and be like, oh, remember when I used to just be able to like go all day and like, you know, or I think like, what if there's something I can do to get my energy, you know, and it does fluctuate because there are times, you know, Christina and I talk a lot about like cycles, and there are times when I do feel those energy boosts, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get.
I'm ovulating and I'm ready.
And I ride those, and I tell my students, I go, I ride those when I feel it, because then I know the other side is coming. And then I can, you know, give myself the rest that I need, but it is still difficult. But I think that grieving of that former self, what could have been, you know, is important.
The former self. I want to say, something came up for me as you were saying, you know, in the interview process, you got 15 minutes, read these questions. It made me think of high school and SATs and GREs and all those things. But it also made me think of when I went in for my surgery. Right before my surgery, they brought up the form, the thing I should sign to agree to this surgery. And I was like, why didn't I get this like 3 days ago? Like, why am I signing this in the middle of like, of all this anticipation, you know? And it seemed to me comparable to like, you know, the assumption that I'm somehow totally fine going into this, you know.
Yeah, you're not dealing with like heightened emotions and like
Yeah. And to me, I think that might be just thinking of like systems of oppression and how they work to like, I don't know. I don't know what the point is actually, again.
I thought about it last time when they gave me the question. They're like, okay, you have 15. And there I am, like 15 minutes, like trying to like, you know, there's 10 questions and you are trying to bring the best version of yourself, right? And articulate yourself and really like encapsulate a lifetime's worth of work. And you have 15 minutes to try to, you know, download the questions in your mind and then come up with some really thoughtful answers. And I was like, that's fucking impossible. And so when it was Candace and we were going over like HR protocols and, oh, you know, 3 days, I was like, wait, you're supposed to get questions 3 days before. And she's like, oh, well, that's the equitable way to do it. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, it was just astonishing. I was like, oh, so then you have time to digest the questions, to be able to formulate answers. And I think I know this because I've, you know, talked to people on hiring committees where there's this notion that they have to create a hiring process that's going to be equal to everybody, right? So this is again the difference maybe between equality and equity, right? So that everybody has to get the same thing, even in the interview. Everyone is very like, because they can't give anyone a different environment, right? So like when I'm answering these questions, you know, I'm a very like lively person and I'm not getting like tons of
they're RBF. They're just totally like,
and I'm like, is it landing? Like, you know, and it's just it's a very like, I think it's inhumane actually, because I'm like, can we just be humans? And like, you know, and what I'm saying, if you're vibing with what I'm saying, like, can you let me know? And it's just really strange.
Humane.
It is. I mean, as I'm processing this, I'm like, man, it just feels so like they have to turn off their humanity in order to create this quote unquote equal whatever. And yeah, just that. And then, so in my next, I have an interview in a couple weeks. They're only giving me 10 minutes to review the questions. And so it just feels like, it's to me, for me, that kind of stuff, that kind of pressure is a recipe for mental breakdown, right? Like I know people like to say, oh, I'm better under pressure. And I do perform well under pressure, but I've done that for so long, right? Perform better under pressure, that last summer I experienced burnout and I'm still recovering from that. And I'm like, I don't want to push myself even to the, you know, the point right before, right, my threshold. Like, I don't even want to get close to that. I want to stay in the chill zone. So when, you know, it's like this 10-minute, 15-minute thing, it's like, do they realize how much havoc that can cause for somebody, you know, to like, and then they're not able to present their best self. Like, how does anybody do that? Like, how does anybody present themselves well, given 15 minutes to review 10 very in-depth questions? It's not like, how are you?
Connected
right? Like, tell me about like this deep part about yourself. No,
I think it's connected to hazing.
Why did you get into ethnic studies, you know, and why, you know, do you feel inspired? Like, I was like, oh my God, that's a deep question. Like, that's like a lifetime of answer. And you expect me to, and then I only had like 2 minutes to answer the question, by the way. But anyway, it's just lots of frustration.
Yes, that sounds like hazing, and also like ableism, and also like I don't know, the formula to burnout. That's why so many people are burnt out and sick and trying to find a way out, or trying, like they're desperate for learning strategies to make their life more feasible, like so that they're not and burnout too. Like I'm like that shit takes time for you to recover from. It's not like, oh, I'm just gonna rest and sleep all day and then I'm good. No.
No, I mean, it's not. I mean, I think it's maybe like a year ago it kind of started. I kind of started the down, and then in the summer was like the really, you know, I was in the darkness of it, and then I'm still kind of like, and then there's PTSD around that, right? There's like, oh my God, I don't want to go there again. So how do I, you know, make sure that I don't fall into the same traps? And then all the while, so an example is, you know, I experienced really bad burnout, and then in the fall, I think, I forget how many, I must have taught like 5 classes, and I'm like, fuck, you know, and I was going to be commuting 4 days a week. And I don't know, by week 5, I was like, oh no, like I can't like, and so I was canceling class all the time, and I felt guilty about that. And then I felt guilty about being transparent. And Christina was like, no, you just tell your students, like, you know, I was like, okay, I'm going to be transparent. And so I told my students, I said, look, this is what it is. I can't give you the best of me if I'm working to this level. And they were actually very receptive to it. And they said, your mental health days were our mental health days. And I was like, fuck. So then going into this semester, I built it into my schedule.
Good, very good.
I was only going to work 2 days a week. And so what I said, okay, week 1 through 5, I'll go 2 days. The rest of the semester, I'm only going to go 1 day. And, you know, I'm looking at what does the contract say, and the contract, you know, the adjunct contract says, I think something like 75% face-to-face, right? So I'm like, okay, how can I, and like really, you know, take full advantage of that 25% that I don't have to, and even push that beyond, you know, because again, I said at day 1 this time, I said, I want to give you quality versus quantity, and that's not going to happen if I have to be commuting even twice a week. Like that's just not sustainable. It's not sustainable for any of us, you know.
And that is precisely what I try to encourage folks to do in their lives, is to determine the scenarios that have been really, really hard on them, and then do this process of like self-reflection and self-evaluation, and think, okay, if I were to go through a scenario similar to that one, what changes can I implement to make it so that it's not as whatever the opposite of sustainable is, as toxic or hurtful, damaging, you name it, to me. So I'm glad that you're doing that. And we got to do that over and over and over again in different facets of our lives, because a lot of times, like a lot of people make it seem like you're just one person when we have so many roles. We've got, you know, our work life, we've got our relationships, we have our family, we have our community, and then there are other areas of our life we might prioritize, like, I don't know, learning about like personal finance, and you're dealing with your money, or leisure. Yes, we get to have a say in like having fun and pursuing things for pleasure.
So I love this, because you talk about sustainable productivity, and it almost seems like those two don't go together. Right? Because productivity is it elicits the idea of over production and capitalism and all this, but sustainable, right, is sort of, you know, the opposite of that. So can you tell us like what exactly you mean by sustainable productivity, and then maybe give us like a very specific example of what that could look like?
Yeah, so when I refer to sustainable productivity, the way I define it is finding a way to get your work done that honors your body, mind, spirit, and also incorporates, instead of being dismissive of, your wellness. And so wellness is at the core of it. And also it's a holistic approach to productivity. So it's thinking about goal setting and the process of goal setting. So like creating action plans, habit formation, in a way where you are doing that self-reflection of like, okay, so what are my cycles, or like, what are my energy levels throughout the days? What is my chronotype? Am I a morning person, afternoon, evening person.
I just got this. Someone just gave me this book.
What
and
is
I was
that?
like, okay, it's like a commit 30. It's like how to like have goals and, and I was like, I need this, and I'm hearing I need to incorporate my wellness, into it already. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what does that look like? I mean, I can only speak to my experience. I can share some examples from other clients too, but like in my experience, one thing that I do, because I have to manage my chronic illnesses and my mental health every single day, is I put myself first. And I put myself first by having slow mornings. And I started having slow mornings as soon as I got my workplace accommodations, where I was able to slow down in the mornings and not have to show up at 8 a.m. I could show up at like 10:30, latest 11 a.m. and I was still okay. I still was able to get my work done. So slow mornings. I do something that regulates my nervous system first thing in the morning. That's usually a shower. But for different people, regulating your nervous system might be dancing, humming, singing. It might be taking a hot bath. You figure out what that thing is that regulates your nervous system. So I put myself first. I know, like first thing in the morning, I have to take it slow and I have to get ready. So I've got to shower, get ready, because it's one of the things that I know from years of therapy. I have my anti-depression toolkit, and one of the things that helps me to prevent me from getting into like the really deep dark clouds of depression is getting ready regularly and doing things like keystone habits. So keystone habits are like habits that have positive ripple effects in your life. And so an example of a keystone habit for some people, they're different for everybody. For some people, it might be you're making your bed and you see that you made your bed, and so it makes you feel good. So then you decide to like do something else that's good for you. Or it might be exercise. Some people start their day with exercise because it gives them a boost in their mood, and that boost in their mood then gives them the energy to go on and do something else. It could be anything. Keystone habits can be whatever it is that you can start your day off with that will have a ripple effect. And I say start your day off, but honestly, I know I can turn a day around at any point in time because my chronic illnesses are so unpredictable that I might have a migraine for 8 hours and then it's 3 o'clock and it's like the beginning of the day for me.
Wow.
And so then I'm like, okay, my day starts now because my migraine is gone. Wow. And I go and do my things that I need to do, like my keystone habits or my things that help me with my mental health, which then allow me to be a better mom and a better coach and a better wife and a better you name it,
I appreciate the practical pieces here to your morning and the mentioning of these keystone habits. I feel already like reminded to bring these things into my life. I want to speak to something. I know we're like kind of getting to the end, but I want to name, I think Ana Castillo did this for us when we met with her in our book club. Just it's hard to just how much macro and microaggressions
yes
there are. So it's wanting to come to a place of like constant regulation is not, it's just a challenge because of that. And one of the things I wanted to name for you, Renee, both Yvette and I left Southern California because I think it's even harder, like the 4 classes, the 5 campuses or whatever, all the, like, we know a bunch of people who do this. It is just not sustainable productivity, right? Because at
some point you reach a point where you're like, no amount of blah 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 is gonna fix this toxicity and you have to leave. Yeah, definitely.
And I want to say, I guess I want to start with grief with that, because we're all from Southern California. It's our home. And so the fact that we cannot live here and be healthy and sustainable in our productivity is, I think, just a point of grief, really, that our homeland, our home place is not,
Yeah, I think, and that, I mean, it's a very complicated, I think, acknowledging that. I think for me, I love you talking about like these is, the really, like you said, the tangible, practical, how we integrate sustainable productivity. and it's often we learn those things when things haven't worked, right? We're like, oh shit, well that didn't work, right? So and I don't necessarily am able to have slow mornings because I have to wake up and make my kids lunch and get them to school in time and all that. But what I have learned to do is that after I get home from dropping them off, rather than being like, oh, well, my day starts now and I'm like, no, I'm going to eat a nice slow breakfast. I'm going to watch my little show and I'm going to like chill out until like 10 o'clock, right? Because I drop my kids off.
You do it. Yeah, I love it.
9, and I'm like, I'm just gonna an hour of like not rushing into like things because that does not feel good at all for me. It feels like, oh, I get to just slow down. I get to do what I want to do at my pace. And I think I am then more productive when I do that, right? That I'm not like, rushing into something. And I've also just this week, I was like, thinking about what I have each day. And if there's a day that I have more than one thing I have to do, that really overwhelms me. It's like, oh, I have an appointment, at this time, the whole day revolves around that. Like, I don't want to do anything else, and again, that internalized voice of like, so you're going to waste a whole day, because you have one appointment at, noon. And so, and I think I'm just trying to continuously like give myself permission to be like, yeah, if that's all you get done today, like that's enough, right? Like that has to be enough. And I think coming back, Christina, to what you were saying, I mean, there's so much grief around what's possible and not possible. And for me, what part of what makes my life possible here in Southern California is that I have parents and in-laws whom without there's just, it's impossible. Now, it took me a long time to not be afraid to ask for that help, right? Or to exploit it a little, no, or to take full advantage, right? To say like, hey, mom, I need you to watch the kids, right? So that I can, or feel like I don't have to go pick them up immediately after work. I can come home, rest until I go and get them. Like that took me a really long time to get there. But I know that my life is not possible. Something that comes up for me a lot in that is, my husband and I have been together for 20 plus years, married almost 16 years. And we have to go on date nights. Like there's just no fucking way we would be together this long if we couldn't. And I've had people kind of say like, oh, that's like, it's strange, like it gets out of the ordinary, right? Like, or how lucky you are to have date nights. And the way I say it is like, no, if we didn't have that, we wouldn't be together. It's just not, our relationship wouldn't be sustainable if we didn't have our relationship time. But again, the only reason that's possible is because I can call my mom or my in-laws and say, can you watch the kids, right? Can you watch them overnight? So then I don't have to like immediately go back into mom mode after, and so I think it's that for me, that's been a sustainable relationship, to sustain our relationship is to make sure that we're making a concerted effort. But it's hard. And I think what you were getting at too, Christina, I remember when Ana Castillo said, how can we heal when there's a persistent attack, right? It's not like it's one trauma and you heal from that trauma. It's like you are healing from that trauma while you're persistently being re-traumatized, right? And so it's kind of like, how do we navigate that, knowing that it's probably not going to stop? And so then and not letting that be like a dismal thing, right? It's like, okay, then again, how can we create sustainability that takes that into account, right? That takes into account like these systems are not going to be changing overnight. And so, and which I think brings us back to academia and why I think I feel particularly disappointed in this application process, because these are in departments that are supposed to be different, right? That are supposed to be innately anti-colonial, right? And all of even though they exist within these colonial spaces, it disappoints me when the people in them it is hazing, right, are still kind of perpetuating these things. And you're like, man, really? You're really like, you're going to ask me what my efforts to create accessibility in my classes are when this very interview is not accessible. Like, but then how do I call them out? Like, I don't know. It's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, academia, like any other system, is inherently reifying all the isms. And so even if you try, it's really, really hard to work within the system because of the issues of like of working within a system that hasn't been completely dismantled. And so I like, that's why I pair sustainable productivity with teaching about personal development, because I'm like, you can gain so much of a sense of empowerment once you deeply get to know yourself, once you know what your non-negotiables are, once you know what your values are, once you know what your strengths are and you play to them, once you know your areas of growth and you seek help for those things. And once you start to have that clarity, it becomes more apparent, the decisions that you have to make. You get better at decision making, and you get better at making those like transitions, like in, you know, whether that means you choose to stay but you set firmer boundaries, or you choose to go and you know exactly what your non-negotiables are at the next place. But really, it's knowing yourself, advocating for yourself. That's never going to stop, whether you need accommodations or not. Like, we all deserve to have support. We all deserve to have help, to have community. And the systems were not meant for people of any kind of marginalized identities. And so we have to do our best to take care of ourselves and take care of each other. So yeah, I mean, when I talk about sustainable productivity, I don't want people to get the impression that it's like about working within the system or assimilating, or about like working smarter so that you can like save time and be more efficient and do more work. Hell no. It's about getting to know yourself, working with your mind, body, spirit, incorporating your wellness, making time for the things that truly matter to you, and making those hard decisions with a strong sense of clarity and conviction. Yeah.
I love that wellness is at the center. And I think that's what I've always led with. It's like, you know, definition of social justice for me has always been centering the most marginalized, right?
Yes.
And I think this extends, like, we're centering our wellness in all our efforts. And that, like you said, putting myself first, that's number one. You know, we've talked about mothering, and it's like, you know, I think academia expects, if we're working mothers, that work is first and mothering is second. And we're like, no, that's not how we roll. And I think that's part of us knowing our non-negotiables. It is I will not miss my kids' events, right? Like, that's not going to happen. I will cancel classes to go to first days, right? I will cancel whatever needs to be. And knowing our values. And that does make me feel, I will say, because I feel like in this last interview that I was in, I was very clear. These are my principles. This is, you know, I didn't say it like that, but I led with that. And if that didn't work for them, then maybe that's telling about, you know. And so it kind of feels like, yeah, I was very much, you know, leading with my non-negotiables and with my values. And yeah, I'm not going to work any more than I need to, right? Because I feel like, who are they? Like, who's getting the job over me? Like, I feel like I'm doing a lot. So it's people who are doing more, and I'm like, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do more. So if they don't want me for not doing all of those things, then ni modo, right? Like, then I don't need to be there anyway. I'm not gonna get there and do that anyway. Okay, well, we are coming to time. And
Yvette, your words at the end were so strong and beautiful and empowering. I just like, that's our little, if we're gonna do a reel, it's gonna be that. It's like, so I mean, you are so articulate, and I'm so grateful to have you on our podcast for today and to talk about
a lot of what you said. People are really going to resonate with, and I think it gives so many of us permission to ask for what we need, what we deserve.
Yes.
It's our birthright, right? It's not just like accommodations, right? Because that still sort of centers, ableism and white supremacy. And it's like, no, this is what, just like baseline what we need to live.
Exactly.
And thrive.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you for really being so clear with all of that. Okay. Anything else? You told us about your new coaching group, which I think people are gonna love. Anything else you want to share, or where can people find you?
Yeah, so if anything that I shared resonated with you, I am happy for folks to follow me on my socials. I'm on Instagram, that's where I'm most active. I'm on LinkedIn. I am on TikTok, trying to figure it out. Twitter, and I think those are it. You can also find me on my website, which is gradschoolfemtouring.com. That's where you can find everything.
Yeah. That sounds amazing. So thank you, Yvette.
Thanks, Yvette.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Intro and outro song is called Foreign Fog by The Corner House, a band that features our dear friend Danelia Arechiga. Vengo a trabajar.